Hi, I don't know how to start this, but welcome to my beginners quilted tote sew along. This is my new channel, Curious Handmade, that I've started because lots and lots of you on TikTok and Instagram have said, please can you post on YouTube because your sew alongs would be much easier to follow on here. So here we go. It's taken me most of the weekend to sort out the tech, so hopefully everything's worked. But shout if not, or if you've got any comments, leave them down below. I'd love it if you could like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. I think that's what I need to ask you to do. And I'm going to be doing these sew-alongs every week, and I want to keep them free. So if you like it and you'd love to support my channel, then feel free. There's a link to buy me a coffee, but there's no pressure to do that. But if you want to say thanks, then that would be really nice. What else do I want to say? There's a downloadable PDF with all of the sizes for today's sew along. So if you find it easier, just download that and you can print it and keep it for the future. I think that's everything on this. Just to say, I'm also going to do a follow-up video of hacks of how you can change this tote to suit you. So you can make shorter straps, you could put the pocket on the outside, you could put a zip on the inside pocket. You could do it without boxed corners, and you can do it just plain and not quilted. So I'll do all of those as a follow-up video, but today I'm keeping it super simple. I've got lots and lots and lots of you following me on social who are complete beginners, so hopefully I've made it really straightforward. But if you're not sure, then as I say, leave a comment or ping me a message on social media and I'll get back to you. So without further ado, welcome to my sew along, and I hope you enjoy it.
Okay, so there's just 4 pattern pieces that you need. The bag outer, which you're going to cut 2 of your pieces of your main fabric, 17 inches wide by 19 inches tall, and make a note of the grain line, which I'm going to talk about in a little minute. You'll also need 2 pieces in medium weight batting, and you're going to be quilting these pieces together. If you don't want to quilt yours, then just simply cut the outer to the same size as the bag lining. And so for the bag lining, you want 2 pieces of your lining fabric. So it could be the same as your outer fabric, or you can do a nice contrast, which is what I've done in this one. And that's, you'll need 2 pieces 16 inches by 18 inches. And then you'll need a piece of your main fabric and your lining fabric 8 inches by 8 inches. And then for the straps, 2 pieces 26 inches by 3 inches. So I thought I'd just mention grain line for any beginner sewers, and you'll always see this marking on your pattern, and all you want to do to find the grain line is find the edge, the selve edge of your fabric, which is indicated by this kind of white border on most pieces of material, and you just want to place your pattern piece parallel to that. I thought I'd also show you, this is the batting that I use. It's a medium loft, and you can get them in different thicknesses, so this is the one that I use for this project. This is the fusible interfacing that I use. You don't have to use it on the straps, but I really like it because it just gives them a little bit more structure. I buy this by the roll load because I use it for my squishy key fobs, loads of things, so it's definitely worth investing in. Okay, so now let's get on with the sew along. So you should have 2 pieces of your outer fabric, 2 pieces of your lining, your 2 pieces of your batting, and then you've got your 2 pieces for your pocket. And for your straps, you've got your 2 long pieces of your outer fabric and your 2 pieces of your fusible interfacing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to quilt the outside. So if you want to use pins, then you simply just put one outer piece on one piece of batting, and you're going to do the same on the other ones. And you can just get some pins and pin that to the batting, and then you just need to maneuver the pins whilst you're quilting. I have discovered this temporary adhesive spray and it is brilliant. It does get everywhere, so if you're using it, get a sheet and just keep it with it so that you can put whatever it is you're spraying on top of it. And then you just give it a really light mist, just enough to stick the fabric down. I was also told a top tip, when you finish spraying, just turn the whole thing upside down, spray it out, and then you just clear the nozzle so it doesn't get gunked up for the next time you use it. So once you've sprayed it, you just place your fabric over the top. It's a bit like a post-it, you can kind of reposition it, and when it's all in place, you can just simply just stick it down. And then you just do that on the other piece as well. So you've got your 2 pieces, and then what we need to do is mark up where we're going to do our quilting lines. So you just fold it in half just so you can find the centre point, and once you've got that, you put it down and we'll pop a ruler on top. And then you just make sure it's centered top and bottom. So you can either use one of these pens that erase when you iron on them to mark your lines, or I've got this Hera marker which just creates an indentation, which just makes it a lot easier. And because I'm using a quilting bar, I just need to draw one line and then I'll go to my machine. If you don't have a quilting bar, then you'll probably just want to draw all of the lines in at this point at 1.5 inches apart. At the machine, first thing we want to do is lengthen the stitch lengths. For quilting, I like to do mine at 3.5, and then this is the quilting bar that I use. It just pops in easily, and I set that at 1.5 inches apart, but it's purely preference. If you like them narrower or wider, it's entirely up to you how far apart you do them. And now we just get on with the quilting. So either following the lines that you've just drawn on with your heat erasable pen, or like I've done here, I just follow the line down that I've just marked in the fabric. And then when I get to the bottom, I cut the threads. Luckily on my machine, I've got an auto cutter, but you just use your snips and then you would line them up. If you're using your quilting bar, you can see here I'm putting the quilting bar on the line that I've just stitched, and then I just follow that down, and it's brilliant because it just keeps them all nice and equally distanced, and it just looks really neat. And you'll notice I've started in the middle and then I work my way out one way, and then I just fold over the material as it's kind of getting bunched up on the right hand side. And then once you get to the end of the left hand side, then you turn the whole piece of fabric round and you do the other direction till you've got the whole piece nice and quilted. Now you'll remember that we cut the outer quilted pieces an inch bigger than the lining, and that's because you do have some shrinkage when you are quilting. So now we will need to cut them down so that they are the same size as the lining pieces. So you're simply going to measure so that they're 16 inches across by 18 inches tall. If you're going to put a label on your bag, now's the time to do it. So we just take one of our pieces from the outer, and you want to find the centre across the width of the bag. And then I like to put mine about 1/3 of the way down, and we just sew round that on the machine. Before I do go to the machine though, I do glue the label down, and I use this special fabric glue, and it's brilliant. I've got a link to it in my Amazon shop below, because a lot of people always ask me about it. And all it does is it keeps the label in place so that it just makes sure that it stays on when it's nice and straight when you're sewing. And then the glue just kind of evaporates away. I think it's also washable, so it's very temporary, but it's super helpful. Okay, so now that's sewn in place, it's time to sew the two outer pieces together. So you simply place them right sides together, and what we're going to do is either pin or clip down the right hand side, the left hand side and the bottom. We're not sewing along the top. And once you've clipped those together, we're going to go to the machine and we're going to sew with 1/4 inch seam allowance, and just back tack starting at the beginning and at the end, just to keep those ends secure. If you've got a walking foot, you might want to put this on now. If you're new to sewing, you probably haven't got one, and I don't think you don't have to have one. I use my normal foot for this. Walking foots just sometimes make it easier, particularly if you're sewing batting together, and it just makes sure that the top and the bottom pieces feed through equally and they don't kind of get bunched up or the tension doesn't get affected. But anyway, I just use my normal foot. Okay, so now we're going to sew down those two sides and along the bottom with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So if you've got pins in, make sure that you're taking them out as you go down because you don't want to sew over them. And also if you've got the clips, just move them out the way. You can see here I'm just using my fingers to kind of push the batting in under so it doesn't get caught up in my foot. And again, if you're new to sewing, you might not realise when you get to the bottom, remember to finish with your needle left in the material, and then you can lift your press foot and pivot and then keep going from there. Then carry on along the bottom and up the other side, and just remember to do a quick back tack at the beginning, at the end, as I say, just to make sure that those seams are nice and secure. And now it's time to create the boxy corners. I've got a template that I've made out of card that's 2 inches by 2 inches, and it's worth making one of these because you'll use it loads. And then inside the sewing line that you've just made, you want to mark the 2 inches with a heat erasable pen. If you haven't got a piece of cardboard, you can just use a ruler. And then I mark this on both sides and then I cut them out. And then to create the boxy corner, what you do is you just pull those two bits that you've cut apart there so you can line up the seams, and just make sure that the seam lines are really nicely straight on top of each other. And when you're comfortable that they are, just pull the two sides of the seams flat, so that they're not all really bunched up when you're sewing. Clip those in place, pop a clip in either side, and then we're going to do that on the other side as well. And then we're going to head to the machine to sew them up. And you just want to sew both of those with 1/4 inch seam allowance. So it should now look like this, and now the fun part, you get to turn the bag inside out and you can start seeing that it's taking shape. Poke the corners out with your fingers, and then you can go in with a chopstick just so that you've got a nice sharp edge. If you see any random spray threads, just snip them off as well. Now put that to one side because it's time for us to make the straps. So get your 2 pieces of fusible interfacing and your 2 long straps, and we're going to head to the ironing board. Before you do add the interfacing, you just want to make sure that the fabric is really nice and flat, because once you put the interfacing on, it'll stick any creases that are in there, so you don't want that to happen. So make sure that's flat, and then turn your pieces over and take your fusible interfacing, and you'll see that one side's got kind of tiny little glue dots on. They're the ones that you want to be putting against the fabric, because that's when it's heated, that's how they stick to the fabric. So then put them together, turn them over, and then starting from the center and working your way out, just iron those in place until they're nicely stuck together. Then you want to iron those in half. So with the wrong sides together, just simply fold them in half and press along so you've got a nice sharp crease, and do that on the other strap as well. Now, to make sure that the straps are exactly the same width, I've created a piece of card, you can do this as well, and just mark on it a 1/2 inch line and a 1 inch line. And we're going to use this as a template. So you want to open up the strap that you've just ironed, and then you want to place the 1 inch line on top of that crease that you've just ironed, and then you fold the outside edge in, and that should be coming down to about the 1/2 inch line, and then just press that in place. Do that all the way along, and then when you get to the end, you simply turn the strap round and do it all over again on the other side. Once you've done that, you just then simply fold the whole thing in half again with those bits you've just folded tucked in, and then pin along or clip, and we're going to go to the sewing machine and sew these 2 straps up. So do that on both of the strap lengths, and then you're good to go. So you want to sew the open edge first, and what you want to do is you want to line it up with the 1/8 inch line on your foot, or you might have it marked actually on your stitch plate. And this is what you want to follow. Don't look at the needle, because that's when you go wonky. Just follow the line, and then you just sew all the way down. You shouldn't need to push the fabric. You just let the machine do its work, and you just guide the fabric so that it's staying nice and straight. So you can see here, I'm literally just taking my time, taking out the clips as I get to them, and then just making sure that that open edge is just all nice and neatly lined up. And then when you get to the end, you simply just keep your needle in, pivot, sew across, and then we're going to come down the other side, exactly the same, 1/8 inch seam allowance, just top stitching down that strap. Okay, so we just need to make sure that the straps are exactly the same length. So they're going to be roughly 26 inches, because that's the length you cut the fabric to before. Now we're going to cut them down to 24 inches. So simply cut off one end, turn it round, and then measure 24 inches and cut off the other end, and do that with both straps. Okay, so now we want to make sure that the straps are going to be equally placed on both sides. So simply find the center point of your bag, and then you want to find the quarter point. So mark that with a pen, and you want to do that a quarter in there and a quarter in on the other side, and then mark up exactly the same on the other side. Take one of your straps and just make sure that the strap isn't twisted, and you want to pin or clip one side and just place it just slightly above, so it's proud on the top of that edge, just so that it's definitely going to get sewn in and be nice and secure. And so you do that on both sides. And then we're just going to head to the machine and sew those in place. If you can, remove the table so that you're able to just feed the material round and you're not in danger of sewing one side of the bag to the other. If you can't, just be really careful when you're doing this bit. And then just sew those in place with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now it's onto the pocket. So this is really easy. Just make sure you've pressed your pieces so they're nice and flat, and then with the right sides together, pin or clip round all 4 edges, and you're going to sew round all 4, and then just leave a couple of an inches gap along the bottom, just so that you can turn it right side out. Okay, so with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you'll be starting and stopping either side of that gap that you've just left. You want to just do a little back tack so that the stitches are nice and secure at the beginning and the end. When you get to the corners, don't forget to keep your needle in and pivot, and then keep going. So sew round all of those edges till you get back to the other side of the opening of where you started. Now you just want to get some scissors and we're going to clip those corners off. Be careful not to cut into the stitches, but just get close to them. And what this does is when you turn it the right side out, it really reduces the bulk on that corner so that it sits nice and flat. Once you've done that on all four corners, then you want to put your fingers through that gap that you left and turn the whole thing the right side out. And then you want to take a chopstick or something not too sharp because you don't want to poke through the corners, but just something that will poke into those corners so that they're nice and clean and crisp. So once you've done that, you want to go to the iron and give the whole thing a really good press, because now we need to close up that hole that we've left. So what we do is we iron it and then we fold down an inch on that edge that's got the opening in it, and we're just going to top stitch all the way around that top flap, and it just creates quite a nice sturdy top to the pocket when we put it into the lining of the bag. Next time I do this, I will obviously make sure that my gingham lines are all lined up, because as I'm editing this video, it's really bugging me that they're not. But anyway, moving on. So now we're going to pin the pocket onto one of the lining pieces. So mark 6 inches down, that's going to be where the top of the pocket's going to be. And then you just want to find the centre of the width. So that should be 8 inches across. And then get your pocket piece, fold it in half so you find the centre of that. And then you just line the top of the pocket piece up with that mark you've just made, and then pin it in place top and bottom. Head to the machine, and then just with a top stitch, sort of 1/8 of an inch in, you just want to sew down the right hand side, across the bottom and up the other side. Obviously not sewing across the top because you want to make sure that you can get into the pocket. Okay, we're almost there. Now we need to just sew the two lining pieces together. So get both your lining pieces and place them right sides together. Then place your pins or clips up the two sides and along the bottom, and then just mark a hole in that bottom about 3 or 4 inches, because you don't want to sew there, because that's where you're going to turn the whole bag the right side out once you've sewn the lining and the outside together. Okay, so at the machine we're just sewing with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So we're starting at the top of the right hand side. We're going down that side, removing the clips and the pins as we go. And then when we get to the bottom corner, we keep the needle in and pivot, and then go across the bottom as far as the first edge of the opening that you're leaving. So make sure you do a little back tack before snipping that, and then move across to the other side of the opening and carry on, and then go along to the corner, pivot, and then go all the way up the left hand side. And remember, we're not sewing across the top. Right, excuse the sudden change from day to night, but I totally forgot to do the boxed corners on the lining, so I had to recreate this and film it later. So we're just going to do exactly what we did with the outer. So get your 2" by 2" template, and then inside the seam that you've just sewn, you just want to mark with your erasable pen the 2" box there and on the other side as well, and then cut those pieces out. Then, as you did with the outer, you just want to pull those corner bits apart, line up the seams nicely, and then just sew across the top with your 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And it will look like this on both of those boxy corners. If you want to turn it the right side out, just to check that everything's all sewn together nicely, and it should look something like this. And you can just see where you've left that hole in the bottom, and that's where you're going to be turning the whole bag the right side out once you've sewn the lining and the outer together. Back in the daytime. So as you were, pretend the lining corners are boxed for this purposes of this demonstration. So turn the lining back the wrong way round, and then you want to put the bag that's the right way round inside the lining, so that the bag and the lining are right sides facing. I hope that makes sense. Then just wiggle those around so everything's kind of lined up, because then what you want to do is we're going to align the tops and the sides. So we're going to start with the side seams. First, we line up the side seams, so making sure that the seams of the lining and the seams of the outer of the bag are all lined up nicely. Make sure that the handles are tucked in, and then do the same on the other seam, pin that in place. And then once you've done that, simply work your way around the rest of the top of the bag, and you just want to make sure that the top of the lining and the top of the bag are matched up. before we head to the machine and sew all the way around that top with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and we're going to go backwards and forwards just over the strap so they're really nicely securely sewed in. So again, I've taken the table off my machine so that I can feed the whole bag around and it makes it a lot easier. So if you can, I would suggest that you do the same. And then I like to start to sew just off the center of the back of the bag. And then you just do a back stitch before you get started, and we're sewing with a 1 inch seam allowance, and we're just working our way all the way around. And as I say, when you get to the straps, just make sure that they're lined up nicely, and then just go backwards and forwards just a couple of times just to make sure that they're really solidly sewn in. Once you get all the way round, then you just do a little back stitch, and then you're ready to turn the whole thing the right side out. Just snip off the top of those handles before we turn it the right side out. And then find the hole that you left at the bottom of the lining and then pull the whole thing the right side out. So just take your time, you don't want to pull that hole apart or break the stitches in any way. And then once it's all turned the right side out, just to get rid of any loose threads, and then poke out the corners of the lining, and then just with your fingers find that hole, and you can just finger press that closed and then just pin it in place. And then we're going to head to the machine and we're going to choose a really short stitch length of maybe 1 stitch length, and then just sew right along that edge just to close that hole up. If you want to be super neat, you could do this by hand with an invisible stitch, but to be honest, no one's going to see it in the bottom of the bag, so I just do it with my machine. Okay, and then the last step is we just want to sew all the way around that top edge. So what you want to do first is just clip so that the top of the edges are flush and the lining isn't kind of poking out above the outside. So once you've pinned or clipped that in place, we're going to go to the sewing machine, and with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, we're going to stitch round. And then this also is another extra bit of security to make sure the handles are really nicely sewn in and that they're not going to come out in any way at all. Okay, so at the machine, I like to start sewing just off one of the side seams on the back of the bag, and then you start and stop with a tiny little back stitch. And then as you're going over the seams, you want to take your time because they're quite bulky by this point. And then, as I say, we're sewing with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So the easiest thing is just line it up with the side of your presser foot. And if you stay with the top of the bag towards the right hand side edge of your presser foot, then you'll stay in a nice straight line, and you do that all the way around the top of the bag. All that's left to do is give it a very light press because you don't want to iron out all of that nice squishy quilting, but you've made yourself a quilted boxy tote. I hope you enjoyed my sew along, my first long YouTube one. Hope it wasn't too long. Give me feedback and welcome it, and congratulations, and share your makes with me. See you in the next sew along.